Good afternoon. I'm Jacqueline Feldscher, a senior national security correspondent for Defense One. Thank you so much for joining us for this keynote interview with Colin Kahl, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Kahl has been serving in this role since April, and prior to that was the National Security Advisor to then Vice President Biden. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we jump into our conversation, one quick note for the audience. We will hopefully have time for a couple audience questions at the end, so if you have any questions for our guests, please submit them via the chat box to the right of your screen. I'd like to start off talking about the news of the day, the Russian military buildup on the border with Ukraine. The White House said yesterday that it is considering sending more equipment or troops to the border if the escalation continues. I'm wondering how much the Defense Department has prepared to respond to this potential question.
Well, I mean, first of all, we're all watching with concern the buildup of Russian forces near the Ukrainian border. I think we've been in lockstep in terms of consultations with our allies, sharing intelligence. We all see the same thing. I think the president communicated to President Putin yesterday that we all see what's going on. And he also communicated that there would be significant consequences if Russia moves forward and further invades Ukrainian territory. We have provided since 2014 about $2.5 billion of security assistance, something like 450 million of which has been delivered this year. That includes things like ammunition, Javelin anti-tank systems, counter mortar radars, and other capabilities, because of course Ukraine has the right to defend itself as any sovereign nation does. So there are options to expand security assistance to assist in Ukraine's self-defense, but I don't want to get ahead of the president's decision space on that. And I think Jake Sullivan was pretty clear with all of you just a few minutes ago how determined we are to prevent Russia from invading Ukraine again.
I want to talk next about integrated deterrence. This is a concept that the Secretary introduced in April. I'm wondering what do you need to really put this into practice now that it's been kind of an idea on the table for several months? Is there anything you need from Congress? Sort of what in practice do you need to make this a reality?
Well, I mean, we'll need a lot because, of course, it'll inform almost everything that we do. The Secretary has been talking about this for most of this year, this concept of integrated deterrence. It's going to be a cornerstone of the National Defense Strategy, which will come out shortly after the National Security Strategy. It may be worth just saying a few things about kind of how we've been conceptualizing it here at the department. And I think it's worth having both sides of the equation defined, both integrated and deterrence. So in terms of integrated, we mean integrated across domains. So conventional, nuclear, cyber, space, informational, integrated across theaters of competition and potential conflict. Integrated across the spectrum of conflict, from high intensity warfare to the gray zone, integrated across all instruments of national power, because deterrence is not only a mission of the Department of Defense, but we need other tools in the toolkit like sanctions and diplomacy. And maybe most especially integrated across our allies and partners, which are the real asymmetric advantage that the United States has over any other competitor or potential adversary. But we also, when we talk about integrated deterrence, we need to think about deterrence differently, given the existing security environment and the potential scenarios for conflict that we're trying to deter. So in the first instance, we at the Department of Defense need to have the capabilities and the concepts to deny the type of rapid fait accompli scenarios that we know potential adversaries are contemplating. So they can't make a rapid lunge at our partners and allies before they believe the United States can show up. So we have to be able to deny those types of scenarios. We also have to make ourselves more resilient, because frankly, we know that our adversaries have developed theories of victory, cognizant that they wouldn't do particularly well in a protracted conflict with the United States. So they don't intend to fight a protracted conflict. Instead, they intend to blind us and deafen us and slow us down so we can't surge forward, and turn us inward, frankly, so that we're focused on domestic matters rather than getting to the fight. So what that means for us is that we have to make our systems and our networks and our critical infrastructure much more resilient so that they can ride out early attacks on those networks that are aimed to prevent us from moving forward to defend our allies. So resilience will be a major theme. Of course, the department also needs to have the capabilities to impose overwhelming costs, especially in contexts where potential adversaries threaten our very existence. And so the Secretary has spoken about the need to continue modernizing the nuclear triad to make sure that we have a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent as the ultimate backstop. But we'll also develop additional capabilities. And then last but not least, we have to work alongside our allies and partners so that our adversaries know that they're not just taking on the United States, they're taking on a coalition of countries who are committed to upholding a rules-based international order. So that's really what we're talking about when we speak about integrated deterrence. And I think you'll see that fleshed out even more in the NDS.
So the Pentagon recently put out the Global Posture Review, which faced some criticism for some perceived it to not make big enough shifts as the Pentagon is making this pivot to great power competition and to preparing for a potential conflict with China. So what is your reaction to that criticism, and will these calls for greater changes be met in future strategy documents that might be coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the criticism, but I think it fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of the document. The purpose of the document was not to define our global posture for all time. Instead, it's largely a strategic framing and disciplining document. It's meant to provide a structure around which the department can prioritize not only our current posture, but the posture decisions we make in the months and years ahead. What the document clearly identifies is that the priority theater is the Indo-Pacific, followed closely by Europe, and that we will economize our posture in other parts of the world, whether that be the Western Hemisphere or the Middle East or Africa. But we are making major muscle movements in the Indo-Pacific, in particular. In September, around the time of the ministerial with the Australians, we announced rotational fighter and bomber deployments to Australia. That kind of got lost in all the other news about AUKUS, but it's a big deal. We also continue to be in conversations with Japan and South Korea, two of our closest allies in the region. And when the Secretary traveled to the Philippines, and which led to the restoration of the VFA agreement with the Philippines, we now have, I think, additional opportunities to explore posture changes in the Philippines. Meanwhile, we're making investments in improving our infrastructure in places like Japan, Guam, and the Pacific Islands, and in Australia. And last but not least, we're just doing more things in the Indo-Pacific. I would call attention to a recent multi-carrier exercise that we conducted near Okinawa, which not only involved 2 aircraft carriers, which the last time I was in the Pentagon would have been in the Middle East, but now we're in the Indo-Pacific conducting operations alongside the UK's aircraft carrier, a large helicopter ship from Japan, as well as other countries like Canada and New Zealand. And this is exactly the type of integrated deterrence signaling that the Secretary has been talking about showing our potential adversaries that they would confront an overwhelming coalition were they to engage in aggression.
So the Pentagon is also in the midst of the National Defense Strategy. Do you have any update on when we might be able to see that, when that will be released?
Yeah, we have a number of strategic reviews underway all at the same time. We have the National Defense Strategy, and then nested under that will be the Nuclear Posture Review and the Missile Defense Review. And of course, the NDS itself is nested under the National Security Strategy. So I think we should expect that the National Security Strategy will come out first, shortly followed by the NDS. I would hope that we would see that early in the new year.
Can you explain the decision to release the Global Posture Review before all of these strategy documents you talked about? How can you evaluate the posture before you've set the strategy?
Well, if the GPR were the final word, I think the question would be appropriate. It's not the final word. We were also given a short timeline tasking from the White House to conduct the GPR, so that drove the timeline. But as I said, our posture will continue to evolve, and the GPR is informing the NDS, which will in turn inform additional iterations of our posture. So all these things are living frameworks.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you for an update on Afghanistan. You said in October that you believed that ISIS could be capable of conducting attacks outside of Afghanistan within 6 to 12 months. And I'm wondering over the past couple months if you've seen anything that's changed that timeline to make you believe it could be either sooner or later.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is my Senate testimony in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And there, what I was recounting, of course, was not my personal view, but the view of the U.S. intelligence community. And that view remains, as far as I understand, that ISIS-K in Afghanistan could generate the capability to conduct external operations in as little as 6 to 12 months, and that for al-Qaeda it could be a year or two. I think it's important because some of the coverage of those statements, I think, were a little overwrought. That doesn't mean that attacks are happening in the next 6 or 12 months or 1 or 2 years. We have a substantial capability to disrupt those attacks. ISR, SIGINT, other national technical means, human sources were postured in the region, and we are remaining vigilant against those. So yes, ISIS-K is a dangerous organization, so is al-Qaeda. They intend to do Americans harm. Their capacity may grow over time, but we will remain vigilant against disrupting those threats.
So when troops withdrew from Afghanistan, there were some anti-war activists and lawmakers that applauded the end of the, quote unquote, forever wars. I'm wondering if you're worried that sort of the politics around the forever war are going to impact the public perception of and public support for counterterrorism missions, which of course are still continuing. And if you're worried that any erosion in public support could harm the national security of the United States.
Look, I'm not a politician or a political advisor. I would just say that I think in general, the United States public is exhausted with what you've described as the forever wars, which is different from counterterrorism, targeted counterterrorism campaigns. I think that what the U.S. public has signaled across administrations of both parties is not wanting to continue to engage in multi-decade-long nation-building projects in the name of counterterrorism. And so we have shifted the model towards a smaller footprint that acts by, with, and through our local partners and alongside our coalition allies and partners. And we're doing operations like that in places as diverse as the Sahel and Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and we have the capacity to conduct over-the-horizon activities in places like Afghanistan. So I think the importance here is that we have to remain vigilant against threats to our homeland and our interests, but we have to do it in a way that is sustainable politically, economically, and militarily. And I think that's the model the administration has adopted.
To delve just a little bit deeper on the idea of conducting these over-the-horizon strikes in Afghanistan, I know that Kevin just asked about this, but hoping to get a little bit deeper with you, sort of how these strikes are conducted without having a footprint in the region. SOCOM leaders have said that they're relying on other Afghans, not the Taliban. I'm wondering, is that good enough? And have you seen evidence of any Afghan opposition as you share intelligence and work with these other Afghans on the ground to collect intelligence and conduct strikes?
I'm not going to comment on the nature of the human networks that may or may not exist inside Afghanistan to provide us information. I'll just say that we get information from the ground in Afghanistan, and that is integrated with the information we're getting from overhead ISR, which continues from SIGINT and other national technical means, and that we remain postured in the region to get after these threats when they materialize. Look, we've done this before. In places like Libya, for example, we devastated ISIS in Libya with post not having a presence on the ground there. So it is possible. We know how to do this. We remain capable of doing it, and we are committed to doing so.
So despite the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan and the winding down of the forever wars, there has not been any match in winding down of the Pentagon's budget. And I'm wondering what that money that went to Afghanistan is now going for, and sort of what's your defense about why the budget level should stay the same even as some of these costly wars are ending?
Look, it's an important question. I think the security environment is different than it was. I do think that we spent trillions of dollars on conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those conflicts will continue to be debated for the rest of our lifetimes and probably for the rest of all time. Right now, the number one pacing challenge for the Department of Defense is China. Russia is also a significant concern. And so we are, optimizing our budget for the long-term competition with China, which requires significant investments in cutting-edge capabilities, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cyber and space capabilities, hypersonics, unmanned and autonomous systems, undersea warfare, and also making sure that our nuclear deterrent remains safe, effective, and credible. And so that's what's driving our budget is the reality of the current security environment, and in particular, the need to pace to China.
I know we're nearing the end of our time, but I had a quick question for you about the multiple documents the Pentagon has put out recently about climate change and how it can counter climate change and kind of making it a top priority, which is, has been a top priority for the Biden White House, but is not typically as much of a priority in Republican administrations. So I'm wondering what you're doing at the Pentagon to really solidify this as a priority that you think will sustain past your tenure at the Pentagon and potentially into other administrations.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first, the National Defense Strategy will talk about the profound national security threat that's posed by climate change. This isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a human being issue. The climate crisis is an existential one. And for the US military, it's going to change the operating environment in which our forces operate, whether that's places like the Arctic, where great power competition is accelerating, or frankly, in the Indo-Pacific, where climate change is going to have a lot of impact on how we conduct our activities. It's generating more missions for the Department of Defense. 5 years ago, I think the National Guard devoted something like 14,000 person days to fighting wildfires. This year, it's more than 176,000 person days to fighting wildfires. We can expect the demand signal to do more at home and also for humanitarian and disaster relief missions abroad to go up. We know that climate change is a profound threat to our infrastructure around the world and here in the homeland. And we also know that we have to get after the operational energy questions, not just because of the need to address climate change, but frankly, because of the need to make sure that our logistics are sustainable in the context of great power competition. So we're going to make that clear. We have in documents like the department's climate risk assessment, as well as our climate adaptation plan. We'll continue to do so in the NDS. And then, of course, we're going to have to resource these initiatives and make the types of investments in resilience, adaptation, and mitigation that are absolutely essential to get after this challenge.
So we do have one audience question that I'm hoping you can address very quickly. I know you have a kind of a time crunch this afternoon, but we have a question about U.S. and South Korea approving a new strategic planning guidance to update the operation plan and contingency. One of our listeners is wondering about the background of this and the main focus of that strategic planning guidance.
Well, look, the secretary talked a lot about this. He just got back from Seoul. Our planning with South Korea is robust and continues to evolve given the evolution of the threat posed by North Korea, as well, frankly, as other challenges in the region. So I think really this is just the next turn of the crank in terms of our ongoing planning and the evolution of our alliance with South Korea, which is as strong as it's ever been.
Well, great. We are unfortunately out of time. I want to be respectful of your next engagement. Thank you so much for joining us for this very insightful conversation. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. Please stay tuned for the next editorial session with Representative Jim Langevin following a message from one of our sponsors.